Due to language, nature, and general themes of this content, it is intended solely for adults 18 and over, and is in no way recommended or intended for children under the age of 13. Viewer discretion is advised. I have a mild one. Last year, I worked as night shift security at this place called the Desert Museum, which is essentially a zoo and botanical garden that showcases the different life found in the Sonoran Desert. It's a phenomenal place, highly recommended if you find yourself in Tucson, Arizona. So, towards the end of closing time, all the employees leave and I lock the whole place up, including the main gates into the place. Eventually, later in the night, I have to go open up the gate for the custodians to leave. And while I was waiting, I got bored and started playing with my flashlight. So, I shine my flashlight onto a hill across the street and see these two really weird glowing orbs. But once I turn the light off, I can't see them anymore. And keep in mind, this place is in the middle of nowhere with a new moon. Everything is pitch black. I keep playing around with it, trying to figure out what these weird reflective orbs are, until they suddenly start to move, and I realize I'm an idiot because those glowing orbs were actually eyeballs, and suddenly I can see a full-grown mountain lion that I've unknowingly been having a staring contest with for the last 15 minutes. I worked in an abandoned hospital for a while, and it was full of what the hell, and it seemed every darn night something would happen. Everything had logical explanations, but working in there alone at night was a trip. First, the doors in the stairwells had gas piston hinges that wouldn't really close the door and slowly leak out. You get the other end of the hallway, and the stairwell door would slam loudly as if somebody slammed the door closed. Took me a week to figure out the pattern of which doors did it. The elevators were somehow rigged together so you would go from one floor to the next, and when the door opened, the elevator across the hall or next to you would be closing like you just missed somebody getting in. This was totally random. I once turned on the PA system with a radio next to it so I could have music throughout the building. I thought it was clever till it turned itself off when I was in another part of the building. Had an auto timeout switch. I once walked to the emergency room, and there was this bloody dude holding his arm just outside the door staring at me. I froze and we just stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity, plus a few hours. Then he tells me to let him in because he broke his arm. I tell him this is an abandoned hospital, and he just walks out into the darkness without saying another word. Once was doing floors at night at this pipeline fittings company in the middle of the boonies, and looked up and there was this Hills Have Eyes looking dude on crutches banging on the door. Tells me to open the door and he needs a ride because his van had broken down. The guy had had his right leg all bandaged up, so pretty sure he was lying. I told him no thank you and he just laughed and hobbled into the night. That job was awful for my nerves. I used to work as a night watchman on a larger property. Not just a big building, but a large surrounding property as well. I would say 50 acres. Well, this property was not in the best of areas. It was kinda secluded, but had a subdivision nearby. Anyway, it had a really long driveway that was gated. One night, I start my rounds by walking out the front door of the place, which was all lit up. As soon as I lock the door behind me and take a step, I hear a woman's voice scream, "Oh my God, somebody please help me!" up at the end of the driveway. It was somewhat faint, and I took 5 steps into the driveway, skidded to a stop, and ran back inside to call the police. They responded with multiple police cars and even a helicopter. They found absolutely nothing. I still think it could have been someone trying to lure me out there. Another story. When I first started working at the same place, I was enjoying being out on the access roads at night that crisscrossed the property. There was a lake and various parts of the property were heavily wooded. I parked out by the lake and watched the bats flying over the lake catching insects. After a while, I hear something in the woods on the hill behind me. Snapping of branches. I ignore it, but then I hear it again. The noise louder as it had gotten closer. I'm a little creeped out now, but try to ignore it. And then I hear more noise even closer, maybe 30 feet behind me on the hill. I finally whip out my flashlight and shine it up the hill, and I see a big old buck just standing there. I didn't work security, but I worked midnights at a paper mill. For those not familiar with rural paper mills, they tend to be on the outskirts of town and on massive tracts of land. Our mill has a ton of surrounding forest and huge settling ponds for water reclamation. The whole area is less than 10 square miles. I was one of the outdoor workers in refuse waste management, so I did a lot of testing and gathering samples for environmental purposes. The majority of the time, I'd leave my work shack at 3 a.m., gather my samples, and nothing would happen. It usually took 45 minutes to an hour to drive from site to site, and it was peaceful, just me and the night sky. At the time, the wolf pack in the area had been spotted close to the town and mill the week before, so I was aware of them. I was walking down the catwalk toward the center of the settling pond to take the readings and gather samples, and I couldn't hear anything over the bubbler. So when I turned around, I didn't hear anything, but I saw the outlines of about 8 wolves walking towards my truck between the ponds. I could see the shine of their eyes in the lights, and they were moving with definite purpose. I just sat still waiting for them to move on, but it definitely left me rattled. I worked a security gig in an abandoned hotel which sat directly on the river. When the rooms had balconies, they would hang out over the water. The hotel had closed down and had been stripped bare by the owners. I'm sitting there in the office and I hear a creak, 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 from the left to the right on the floor above me. The hotel was wood framed and creaked like a house when someone was walking around. This sounded exactly like somebody walking the hall on the floor directly above the office. I go up to the next level and into the hall. The hotel itself was only 4 floors high, but long. The halls were bare walls, rooms with no doors and only a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling in the middle of the hallway. I've seen my share of horror movies and know this can be only trouble. But I start walking down the hallway anyway. After all, it's my job to keep people out. I get about a quarter way down the hall and I hear rustling coming from a room. I draw my mag light and get ready to use it. I slowly peek into the room and discover that it's the wind blowing in from the river and moving a curtain. Now, freaked, I started checking the other floors and find nothing. But I know someone is in the building. I make my way back down to the ground floor, still finding nothing, and go into the old ballroom. It's a wide open space, resembling this, and I start walking through it. Out of the corner of my eye, I see someone moving, so I turn and shine my light on them, ready to defend myself. That's when I realized it was my reflection in a broken mirror on the wall. After that, I got the hell out of there and spent the rest of the night in my car in the parking lot. About 2 weeks after that, the place actually burned down. After all this time, I'm still convinced that somebody was in the building, but I never found any evidence of who was there. I was a night shift security guard at a hospital when I was only 20. This was a relatively nice suburban hospital, no trauma unit, so there wasn't a lot going on at night. We made rounds and occasionally helped to strap angry people down in the ER, but mostly we checked people into the morgue. There was a logbook that had to be signed by the guard and the nurse, and paperwork that had to be filed for every corpse that came downstairs. The morgue itself was very small, a freezer that had room for maybe 2 gurneys and 1 table for bodies in the main room. Around the table were all kinds of plastic containers with biohazard labels. Most had parts that I could not identify. One was full of eyeballs. One night, I got a call over the radio that a body was headed downstairs. I went to meet the nurse and saw she was carrying a small blanket. Stillborn. We went to the morgue and she laid the bundle down on the table, unwrapping the blanket and revealing a tiny, discolored baby. She checked the log on it and realized that she had forgotten the paperwork. Corpses are unnerving in their stillness. Bodies move, breathe flows, muscles twitch. But not the dead, not this baby. I stood there with it for a good 10 minutes, my eyes locked onto it, waiting for the nurse to return with the papers. Part of the anxiety was the inevitable horror movie playing in my head, where the baby opens its eyes and looks at me. But part of it was just the uncomfortable confrontation with death I was having. I was in Afghanistan doing a 3-day mission in a valley we have never been in. We had no intel on nobody to let us in on the situation. Think of this as going in dry. We were just there to determine whether or not there was a threat for future supply routes. We set up camp at an old hotel-like structure that had been bombed to shit. It still had all the rooms, but the face of the building was gone. There were still pieces of wall left which basically hid behind to pull surveillance. So a few days go by, and we see nothing. Our intel has nothing new to report. Our interpreters are quiet. It's time to bug out and give the green light to the forces that need this route. This is about 2 a.m. I'm pulling guard duty while everyone else is getting ready to leave. I have a thermoscope and NVOs. Out of nowhere, I see about 100 people gathering into a mass across the valley and call it in. We stay put. We all put our NVOs and try to figure out if this is just some religious crap or another ambush. It absolutely was an ambush. We had been in the area for too long, and local fighters had just enough time to gather everyone up to try and overtake us. We were a small, special group. We realized we were outnumbered and immediately called in air support. The French owned the battle space at the time, and they had backup there within 3 minutes. Next thing I remember was watching hundreds of men with guns through night vision, hearing the sounds of approaching attack helicopters and running at us in full force. We are so outnumbered that fighting to death was really the only way out. The helicopters came out of the darkness and literally obliterated everything. The sound, the smell, the sight. It was unreal. Body parts flown everywhere. When looking at this through thermal optics or NVGs, it looked like rain. There was so much blood. Imagine your impending doom being suddenly wiped out by attack helicopters in a valley on the other side of the planet. It was unreal. Scariest night of my life. I used to work at City Hall a few years ago as a security guard. There were abandoned jail cells in the basement that haven't been used in years. Part of my duties was to patrol them for any squatters. It was probably my second time patrolling alone, and things started to get really weird. I went down to the old prison holding cells, and it's a long, narrow hallway, about 6 meters wide and 100 meters long, with cells on both sides. The hallway was lit with light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. I was walking past the 4th column of cells when the light suddenly went out. I turned my flashlight on and walked back towards the light switch. Right when I was about to turn them back on, the lights flickered again. I thought to myself, this is whack, I gotta get out of here. I started walking fast past the cells, quickly checking on them. I was about halfway when the lights went off again. I heard 2 cells slam. I ran with my flashlight on straight toward the other end of the hallway. I reached the end and ran up to my workstation. Then I called my supervisor and asked him if there were any electronical issues that had been reported. He said no. I had 2 hours left on my shift and could not leave. I was at my workstation, paranoid as hell, and literally shitting my pants. I used to work for a relatively small security company that was privately owned. It had about only 30 employees altogether. They'd get a contract with a factory, and then basically, your job was to sit in that factory for 8 to 12 hours when nobody was working in it. So, I'd be working by myself, alone, overnight, in a completely empty factory. In my 2 years of doing that job, I never saw one single thing I would call supernatural. However, I did see Dennis. One night, my captain calls me on my phone and tells me a new trainee will be coming in about 5 a.m. and to show him the ropes, teach him how to make rounds, walking around the building. That's basically what it is. So it's about 4:45 in the morning, and I step outside to the parking lot to have a smoke and wait on the new guy. After about 10 minutes, a car pulls up, stops, backs up and drives away. I was clearly visible, so I have no idea why he left, but the car passed by about 3 to 4 more times before finally pulling in and shutting off the engine. I could see him in the car and he's just sitting in the driver's seat, staring at me. In the back seat are 2 kids, probably around 6 to 8. After about 3 minutes of me wondering what the hell is going on, he gets out of the car. Dennis is messed up looking. He's about 4'10" and fatter than damn near anyone I have ever seen. He has a huge rash covering about 70% of his body, with a white crust outlining most of it. He then speaks. Had a little trouble finding the place. His voice is high-pitched. I mean, really high-pitched. I'm talking Judge Doom in the final scene of Who Framed Roger Rabbit high-pitched. Then he extends his hand to shake mine. Without thinking much, I shake it. There's 1 finger on it. 1. And the rest of the hand looks like some kind of stumpy flesh mitten. One of the kids gets out of the car, has the same rash and is also very fat, and is also missing fingers. He says, "Daddy, can I get a drink?" Dennis turns around and screams in that high-pitched voice, "Get back in the damn car and don't you get out again." At this point, I'm in shock. So I take the guy around the factory, show him the perimeter, tell him where emergency stuff is. About a minute or 2 into our walk, I notice this guy's smell. I mean, he literally reeks of ball sweat and fresh diarrhea. The whole time he's asking me strange questions like, "Do you have a crush on anyone that works here? Can I hunt on this property?" He finally leaves after standing in the office trying to make small talk with me for about 15 minutes after the tour. On his way out, he said, "We're going to be good friends, even if you don't think so now." I went home about 2 hours later and stood in the shower for a good solid hour, washing myself, trying to get the image of that guy out of my head. I called my captain and asked him to reassign me to someplace else. Never had to see him again. That's been more than 10 years and it still bothers me. I used to be a doorman at a condo in Midtown Manhattan. One night, around 2 a.m., I got a call on a desk phone. A man was telling me that someone in my building was posing nude in front of his window with the lights on, and that he was doing all kinds of sexual things to himself. He expressed concern for his daughter. Her bedroom could see everything. I asked him what floor it was on and such, and I also told him that there isn't much I could do about it since people can really do whatever they want in their property, and then I recommended he closed his blinds and such. I then realized that the apartment he described was supposed to be vacant. I then started to get pretty damn nervous. I was only 19 at the time and thought of all the horrible possible scenarios that could happen. I thought some stranger snuck into the building and started squatting in an empty condo. I grabbed my pocket knife, and instead of taking the elevator, I took the emergency staircase 3 stories up to the floor of the apartment to avoid alerting anyone of my presence. I finally get up to the 3rd floor and notice the elevator still at the lobby floor where I left it. I then slowly start to approach the supposed vacant apartment door. I slowly turn the doorknob to see if it were open. It was locked, and I slowly inserted the key, trying to make as little noise as possible. I open the door and see that all lights are off, except for a light coming from the room the man described seeing a naked man in. My heart started pounding. I had to convince myself that I lived in a physical universe and that it would not be possible for that naked man to know of my presence. I was incredibly quiet. I took off my shoes before entering the hardwood floor apartment, and my socks, holding nothing but shoes and a small pocket knife. I start to approach the bedroom where the door was closed, but the light was clearly on. As I slowly walked toward the door, I noticed that the floor was wet, as if they had just exited the shower. Someone was definitely here. I set down my shoes and I draw the knife. My heart is pounding so hard I feel it in my throat. I did my best, though, to remain calm and to convince myself there was no way for that person to know of my presence. I slowly approached the door. I stayed quiet as possible to see if I could hear anything coming from the other side of the door. I stood there for about 5 minutes in the dark, and I hear nothing. I gently placed my hand on the bedroom door, debating whether to try and open the door slowly or to go in fast before the pervert knows somebody is about to enter. I made my decision. I burst into the room, ready for anything, and I see nothing. I quickly look around the room, quickly look in the closet, and then under the bed. Nothing. The room was furnished because it was used as a showroom for open houses to potential customers. I find nothing, except a pile of what appeared to be semen on the window and floor. I was so confused. I also started to freak out because somebody was here, and now they're not. Where could they be? I put my shoes back on and then turned on all the lights in the apartment and did a full sweep, but I found nothing. I began to exit the apartment and call the elevator to head back to the lobby. The elevator doors open, and to my shock, I see moist footprints on the marble floor of the elevator. I didn't know what to think. I knew I had to get back to my desk now. I rushed back to the lobby, head straight for my security camera system, and backtrack all cameras in the lobby outside for the last 45 minutes. Then I saw it. Not 2 minutes after I entered the emergency staircase, the elevator doors open, and a man in a giant trench coat and fedora exits the elevator and walks outside from the lobby entrance, seemingly barefoot. To this day, I have no idea who that was, and I sure as hell had a hard time explaining this is the board of directors. Good thing I had the security footage of the mysterious pervert, or else I'd have really no way of explaining the large amounts of semen all over the bedroom windows of the showroom condo. The next day I went and purchased a much larger pocket knife. One night, as a night auditor at a small motel, I had this really creepy guy walk in at like 3 in the morning. He was friendly enough and it was a really slow night, so I humored his small talk for a while. What do you do? I mean, what rounds you off as a person? Are you happy? No, I mean, like really, are you happy? This kept going on for a while and he wasn't going anywhere. I suddenly felt trapped with a guy who was living in the shroud of suppressed inner demons. The way you get when you self-medicate with 50 hours of church each and every week. Is there anything you want? Come on, anything at all? You want something from McDonald's? I'll run across the street and get you something. Hey, do you need a Halloween costume? I've got tons of costume accessories in my vehicle. You want to check it out? My answers got more and more firm, and probably a little nervous. I dealt with violent people, drunks, crazies, and all the sorts you could spot from a mile away. But you can't be ready for a guy like this. I can't explain it. I finally just cut him off to say, I appreciate it, but I've got everything I need back here. I'm sorry, but unless there's something you need pertaining to your stay, I've really got to get back to work. He was unflinching. He must have gotten the message, but he certainly didn't show it after I said that. He hung around for a few more minutes before finally leaving. I felt like I needed to shower after he left. This guy was either on drugs or the type of over-the-top calm that is almost guaranteed to explode into a brutal and angry rape scene. " One time, I was on the phone with a friend working security in a different part of the city. It was around 4 a.m., and out of the blue, he says, "Hey man, do you see that?" I look up, and that was when I noticed the shack was bathed in a green light. I looked out the window in front of me and saw what can be best described as a small, brilliantly green sun. It was just above the tree line and just floating there, lighting up the entire landscape. I don't recall if it stayed there until before I left at 6 or was still there when I left. I saw it coming from the east, as did my friend, and he worked at an entirely different facility about 15 miles away on the other side of the city. Whatever it was would have been extremely high up for both of us to see it at the same angle and coming from the same direction. Since it was roughly the same size and shape as the sun, as seen from Earth, it was a few hours before sunrise, is my best guess, is that some rare atmospheric phenomenon, similar to the Fata Morgana that caused the green portion of the not yet risen sun's light to reflect off the atmosphere, causing a green phantom sun to light up the greater Rochester area.